The searing air of Sierra Leone, thick with the scent of dust mingled with the sweet perfume of ripe mangoes and the faint, unsettling aroma of damp earth, always felt profoundly special to me, touching my very soul. It was a land of stark, sometimes shocking, contrasts, where the dazzling, vibrant green of the rainforest met sun-baked fields, and the sincere, bright smiles of its people concealed eyes that had witnessed far too many unspeakable horrors. In the early 1990s, this seemingly peaceful land plunged into a living nightmare. The Civil War, which ignited in 1991, mercilessly tore the country apart, leaving behind only ashes and tears. The Revolutionary United Front, known as the RUF, a group whose name soon became a terrifying synonym for unimaginable brutality and all-consuming chaos, sowed death and destruction without mercy. But behind all this bloody, heartbreaking drama, behind the thunder of tanks relentlessly rolling over shattered roads and the piercing cries of the wounded, lay another, equally destructive, yet far more alluring source of energy. A source that shimmered with its cold, relentless, truly hypnotic beauty. That source was diamonds. This is the story of how the dazzling sparkle of precious stones overshadowed the value of human life, how the insatiable lust for profit turned people into soulless instruments of evil, and how far, truly without limit, the dark shadows of so-called blood diamonds extend. We speak of Sierra Leone, a country whose immeasurable natural wealth, to its deepest sorrow, became its most terrible curse, as the sounds of gunfire echoed across the land and once thriving villages turned to ash. Deep beneath the earth, in mines hidden from all eyes, diamonds were being extracted. This was not the labor of free workers, but of slaves, driven by the barrel of a gun, bound in chains, subjected to forced toil. Gaunt, their eyes filled with terror, people were compelled to pull these sparkling fragments from the earth's depths, fragments that had become symbols of someone's power and the financiers of oppressors. Imagine a young man. Let his name be Ibrahim. He had barely reached his 20th birthday, cherishing a dream to become a teacher. He grew up in a small, cozy village where the only pastimes were evening gatherings filled with the tales of elders and football battles in the dusty village square. But the merciless war reached even these peaceful places. Militants from the so-called ORF seized his native village, took his father's life, and forcibly drove Ibrahim, along with other men and youths, into the mines. Thus, Ibrahim, whose hands were meant for fine motor skills, for writing with chalk on a blackboard, found himself faced with the necessity of mining diamonds, of digging into the earth. All day long, under the searing, relentless sun, he descended into the mine, extracting precious stones from its depths. His hands had long been calloused, and his back ached from constant, debilitating strain. Each time he managed to find a particularly large, perfectly cut diamond, a searing pain would flood his chest. He knew that this glittering stone was, in essence, ammunition for those who held him and hundreds like him in bondage. It represented a new shipment of weapons that would rain down upon his people, another endlessly long week of all-consuming terror. He watched as these diamonds, extracted through unimaginable suffering, sweat, and blood, were sent beyond the borders of his ravaged country, to distant, opulent cities where they were sold for exorbitant sums, the proceeds fueling the very war that had ruthlessly shattered his life. This devilish scheme, cynical in its simplicity, seemed ingenious in its cruelty. The ORF organization, controlling rich diamond fields, forced the local population to mine them. Then, through a tangled web of intermediaries and ruthless smugglers, they sold the extracted stones. The revenues generated were directed towards purchasing armaments, bribing officials, and further expanding their own influence. Diamonds, intended globally as a symbol of wealth and prosperity, had here become a vile instrument of total destruction. The conflict itself was, in essence, fueled by these seemingly beautiful, glittering stones. Meanwhile, on the international stage, thousands of miles away, heated yet utterly helpless debates were unfolding. Increasingly, horrifying details emerged about how diamond mining was fueling bloody wars across Africa. In response, a significant initiative was launched, known as the Kimberley Process. Its primary goal was to streamline international diamond trade and halt their use in financing armed conflicts. However, as often happens, reality proved far more complex and tangled. While world politicians delved into lengthy and sometimes fruitless discussions, shady dealers continued their dirty work. Illicit diamonds, grimly nicknamed blood diamonds, crossed borders unimpeded, ignoring all imposed restrictions. Among those operating in this gray zone was a man whose name would later become known, a certain Mohammed. It was difficult to say if that was his real name, as in such a risky and often criminal business, many preferred to remain completely anonymous, staying in the shadows. Mohammed himself was not a combatant. He didn't wear a military uniform and never participated in brutal reprisals. His true weapon was his meticulously crafted connections, and his main talent, an astonishing ability to find weaknesses in any system and skillfully exploit them. He lived in a neighboring country with a relatively stable market, maintaining direct contact with armed groups in Sierra Leone and buyers on the European continent. He handled all the logistics, organizing transportation, dealing with paperwork, and convincing the right people to overlook the origin of the precious stones. For him, it was simply business, undeniably risky, but incredibly profitable. He saw only pieces on a chessboard in the eyes of Ibrahim and those like him, their value determined solely by the size of the diamond they found. Identifying the true perpetrators, those who financed the war through the diamond trade, was an undertaking of immense difficulty. Investigators working in Sierra Leone were often locals, black men and women who had themselves endured the horrors of war and lost loved ones. They were forced to operate under extreme danger, with only limited resources and practically no support from international bodies that seemed infinitely removed from the realities of that terrible conflict. Detective Kamara, for instance, had lost his wife and daughter during one of ORF's brutal attacks. His actions were driven by an unyielding pursuit of justice. He knew all too well that behind every captured foot soldier stood those who supplied them with weapons, those who funded them. And that money, he acutely realized, was inextricably linked to blood. Kamara began a meticulous investigation, trying to trace the path of diamonds from the deepest mines to bustling international markets. The task seemed nearly impossible, as if he were trying to catch a fleeting shadow. He spoke with former slaves, with the few who had been fortunate enough to escape, with those who had personally witnessed these precious stones being mined and transported. However, many were gripped by profound fear and refused to speak. The fear of the powerful ORF organization, the fear of the ruthless local criminal groups who controlled the entire illicit trade, was too great. Even when they managed to reach authorities, investigations often hit an insurmountable wall. Corruption flourished everywhere, and international cooperation in combating the trade of so-called blood diamonds developed slowly and remained extremely inefficient. Ibrahim, after many grueling months of forced labor, managed to escape. He walked, enduring a difficult journey for several days, subsisting only on the meager roots and wild fruits he could find. When he finally reached the nearest town, under the control of government forces, he was so emaciated he resembled a living skeleton stretched over thin skin. He shared his story, but not everyone was quick to believe him. Many, worn down and accustomed to brutal war tales, viewed accounts of forced labor in the diamond mines as just another facet of the general tragedy, something beyond genuine investigation. However, little by little, the truth began to break through the veil of silence. International journalists, human rights organizations, and the victims of this nightmare themselves all helped to gradually expose the grim reality of so-called blood diamonds. Some intermediaries were detained, and shipments of mined stones were confiscated. But Muhammad, or those who acted like him, always found new, cunning ways. They altered familiar routes, used straw men, and expertly exploited the system's weaknesses. The psychological pressure on those who mined diamonds was truly immense. Ibrahim, even when in relative safety, still couldn't shake the nightmares. The faces of those he was forced to leave behind constantly appeared before his inner eye, and again he heard the agonizing screams of those brutally murdered. Guilt gnawed at him. Guilt for mining those cursed stones himself. He didn't know how to live on, how to wash this stain from his soul. Among them were also those who, having miraculously escaped the mines, desperately tried to return to their former lives. But how could one again become a respected teacher when one's hands were covered in deep scars from forced labor, and one's mind still flashed with visions of experienced violence? How could one reunite with family when unable to explain where you had been and what you had been doing? Meanwhile, public opinion began to shift, slowly but surely. As the truth about blood diamonds surfaced in newspapers and became common knowledge, buyers in Europe and America grew considerably more cautious. Consumers started demanding that the gemstones they purchased be free from any association with cruelty and foreign exploitation. This exerted tangible pressure on the entire diamond industry. The Kimberley process, despite its shortcomings, emerged as the tool that, imperfectly, began to regulate this blood-soaked market. Trials for those found guilty of war crimes were already underway within the special tribunal. However, issues of funding and international accountability remained unresolved. Was it enough to condemn only the perpetrators, the lower echelons of this monstrous chain? What about those who stood at the very top? Those who reaped the greatest profits from this destructive activity? Ibrahim's story was just one among thousands. Thousands of lives, broken and shattered by the world's insatiable craving for glitter, for precious stones extracted at the cost of unbearable human suffering. Sierra Leone undoubtedly endured many other horrors, but it was the blood diamonds that became the grim symbol of cynicism and global irresponsibility. They vividly demonstrated how easily human life could be devalued when colossal sums of money were involved. Even after the protracted civil war concluded in 2002, the specters of blood diamonds continued to haunt the land of Sierra Leone. The nation's recovery proceeded agonizingly slowly, as if the very earth could not yet heal from the pain inflicted by greed and cruelty. Many of those who had spearheaded the illicit diamond trade seamlessly shifted to other criminal enterprises. In contrast, those who had risked their lives extracting these gleaming stones were often left with deep psychological scars, their lives utterly devastated. One wonders if there is any justice to be found in this story. Was the entire chain of those complicit in the crime adequately punished? Most likely, no. However, thanks to the unyielding courage of individuals like Detective Kamara and the candid accounts from those who endured unimaginable suffering, such as Ibrahim, the truth has finally come to light. This knowledge, though steeped in pain, possesses an undeniable power. It serves as a stark reminder. Behind every exquisite object, behind every dazzling stone, may lie someone's profound suffering, someone's life cut short, sacrificed to another's greed. And as we continue to purchase diamonds, as we remain captivated by their mesmerizing sparkle, we must remember the inconceivable price paid by those whose hands extracted these gems from the earth's depths. For true wealth is not the gleam of precious stones, but the invaluable worth of every human life. And what are we, as a society, willing to do to safeguard this